Welcome back to Crafted Reality, the podcast where we dive into the world of play, story, and technology. In this episode, we welcome back bilingual writer Hefin Robinson. Hefin, who hails from Carmarthen, has been a long-time collaborator with Yellow, working on projects like the tabletop murder mystery Cold Case and interactive dining experience Final Cut. He's also been busy crafting stories for theatre, including Pirates of the Odyssey Inn with Hijinx and A Town Called BLYTON with Mess Up the Mess. And of course, more recently, he has contributed his talents to The Field, our audio mystery experience. In our conversation recorded back in October, we talk about his creative process, bilingual storytelling, and the power of interactive narratives. If you're enjoying the podcast and want to support the work we do, consider heading over to our Patreon page. The link is in the show notes. Welcome to the podcast, Hefin Robinson. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Oh, that's okay. Thanks for coming in. So we have quite a lot of different bits and pieces to talk about. We're really interested in finding out a little bit more about your journey to becoming a writer, and then also some of the projects that we've collaborated on in the past, and also some of the projects that you've worked on as a writer and playwright. So I'm just going to go straight in there with the first question, which is always the hardest question, I think, for people, because everybody kind of goes, oh God, I don't know what the answer is. So how did you start your journey? So what sort of first drew you to writing?
To writing? Do you know what? I used to hate writing. Absolutely hate it. At school, it was one of these things that I just couldn't, I couldn't stand, like English lessons. And obviously, I went to a Welsh-language school, so we'd have Welsh lessons as well. So you had to do creative writing in 2 languages. And I used to hate it. And I think the thing I hated about it was the structure of it. You're always being told, okay, this is how you write. You have to write that beginning and the middle and the end. And I don't know if you remember in school, but when I was in school, they'd have these sheets that they'd have the boxes for you to write in the middle and the beginning, And I couldn't stand all that. I think that's what I hated. And then I got to 6th form, and for some reason, I chose to do A-level Welsh. And I had a brilliant teacher, or 2 brilliant teachers actually, who just really encouraged us to write what we wanted to write in the way we wanted to write it. Forget about all the stuff we've taught you about how to write. And so suddenly I started writing all this ridiculous stuff that, just letting that stuff pour out of my brain and seeing what happened. And I think those 2 teachers saw something in the way that I wrote that was maybe stood out as being a little bit different, or a little bit a bit out there, maybe, I think. But what was brilliant is the fact that they embraced that, and they kind of encouraged me to just run with it. And so that's where I started, really, and that really encouraged me to write short stories. And one of the teachers, I should mention the teachers. It was Dr. Jones and Mrs. Davis, which are such Welsh names.
They are brilliant.
Classic Welsh.
Did you say Dr. Jones?
Dr. Jones, yeah.
Not sort of Harrison Ford's character.
Yeah, whip, hat, everything in the Welsh class.
That's who I'm picturing. An archaeologist, an adventurer.
Welsh teacher by day. At night, rummaging through caves and in West Wales, and then she started secretly entering these stories into writing competitions.
I love that.
And I was really fortunate that I won a couple, and that gave me, I think, a bit of confidence that I was going in the right direction, and then I forgot about I went to uni then, and I did drama, and I kind of trained as an actor, really, like so many writers and so many playwrights. And then, I left uni, and I did acting for a while. And I loved acting, but I hated the life of an actor, because you've acted, haven't you?
Yeah. The life is hard. It is difficult to find any kind of anchor in your life, because it's great when you're in work, but when you're out of work, it's tough to kind of just be able to pay your rent and do the things you want to do.
And I think it for me as well, it was not just not having the work, it was the way you get the work, like the fact that you're having to put yourself out there, and you'd find yourself in auditions where you're having to be a monkey or a ballerina pig or whatever, and I'm just like, I don't like this.
That's brought back so many triggering memories.
Yeah,
you know, or an ant, you know, or
Yeah.
gosh, a talking ant.
and you're like, I'm auditioning for a Chekhov. Like, why do I need to be an ant? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then so I kind of gave up on the acting.
Because I remember that's when we first met you. You were in Brent's, so our friend Brent created a street game for one of our Play Arc festivals, and you were one of the characters in one of the locations in the street game, and I think that's where we first met, kind of officially. And then I think we had lost touch for a little bit, and then we re-met for a project. I think it was for Mess Up the Mess. And at that point I remembered, oh my gosh, I know that face. And I went back through all of the photos and I found you in this photo of the street game. I was like, oh wow.
Oh, look at that fresh face.
Look at that fresh young face, full of beans.
Yeah, none of the weight of the world. Yeah, that was brilliant. I remember I think I was in the Packet pub in Cardiff Bay, wasn't I? Doing some game. Yeah, that was so fun. I really enjoyed that. And I think that was my first introduction to that kind of like game. I guess at the time I was seeing it as like game theatre because that was my into it. Yeah. And I guess I've always had that interest in that interaction between audience and action. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that game.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That was a long, long time ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, very,
Brent
very
Morgan.
fun.
Yeah, Brent Morgan was
Yeah,
the
great.
creator. Yeah. God, those are the days.
Yeah, that was brilliant. Yeah, so where were we? Acting.
Yeah,
and
acting.
then I gave up on acting. And then, but I think through acting, you start to, I suppose, working in theatre, I got to watch a lot of theatre, and I think seeing the work of particularly certain playwrights, I think there were people like the classics. I like Pinter, Carol Churchill, but also the work of like Tim. Do you know Tim Crouch?
Yeah.
Brilliant, like theatre maker. And I think seeing their work pushed me towards the writing again, I think. And so I started just scribbling and kind of, going back to that thing of, everything I do still goes back to my Welsh teachers and that thing of like, write what you want to write in the way you want to write it. And I still have their voice in my head now. And I think that's what kind of got me going. And I started off writing in Welsh because that's what I was doing in school. And I guess that's my first language. So it's like home to me, it's where I'm comfortable. And then none of this English language nonsense. And then, slowly I kind of crossed over because the Welsh language is quite small and there's not loads of opportunities. But so that's where the writing started in a really long-winded way.
And it was a beautiful, long-winded way, I must say. And I was going to ask, talking about the Welsh language, how much did your bilingual background influence your journey as a playwright? So over the last few years, have you had opportunity to write now more in Welsh as the time has gone on?
I think that like the Welsh language was my in, really, because I suppose there is less competition being a minority language. And that was my kind of, my break was, I was really lucky to win a writing competition in the Welsh language for a play, and then Theatr Genedlaethol Cymru, who are the Welsh Language National Theatre, they produced that production, and then we were lucky to then take that production on tour. So that gave me, that was kind of the break for me really into the industry. Because I think like a lot of people, I had no idea how you get into writing and how do you, we often talk about knocking on doors. I didn't know what the doors were. Where are the doors? Do you know?
Whose doors?
Yeah. I didn't know it was a door. I thought it was one of those like squeaky partition things from school, the concertina.
Is it real or is it metaphor? Those
Exactly. And because, all these kind of artistic director people are always like, oh, my door's always open. Where's the door? What door? Tell me where to find the door. Like, do you know what I mean? But that was, sadly, I think for a lot of people, like writing competitions and open calls are the way in. Because, unless you're Nepo baby, or whatever, you don't know how the industry works. You don't know how anything works in the industry, and you just have to kind of feel your way through it.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're just literally writing stuff in your room and nobody's ever going to see or hear it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really hard. I hadn't actually really thought about that because it's, I guess with acting, you've kind of got more of an open playground really, because you've got lots of casting platforms. If you're lucky enough to get an agent, then I guess there's somebody else, well, hopefully looking for work for you. I don't know how much that actually happens. And I suppose there's that opportunity, but I guess for writers there perhaps are those sort of calls, but they're going to be little and few, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you find work through those open calls now, or is it more by recommendation? Do you find the more you actually make work, the more that there's awareness of your work, and then I guess the more people that you meet, you are creating that network to open doors for you?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of both. Probably. I think you're still relying on open calls. But yeah, I've been really fortunate that I've worked with people like Yellow Brick who've asked me to come back. Do you know what I mean? And repeat work has made up a lot of my writing career so far, which I'm really grateful for, because there's something really reassuring in the fact that someone wants to work with you again, I suppose.
At least means you're not shit, doesn't it?
Well, yeah.
There is an element of that, though, isn't it? It's like, I thought that went really well. And then like, I've not heard from them for like 3 years. What happened?
Yeah. So I don't know if I'm any good or if I'm just cheap. I don't know.
That's still the way up.
Yeah. That's the thing. So yeah,
I think it's because you're very good. Just to be very, very clear.
Thank you. Can we just take that clip out and start open with that one?
That's
please?
The edit.
Highlights.
I think you're just very good. Okay, and then but then we'll edit it back into, I think I'm cheap.
Yeah, very good and cheap. So so I've like the likes of Yellow Brick, the likes of Mess Up the Mess, who we met through. And it helps that they're lovely, lovely companies to work with as well. I'm talking about them as if you're not here, but
Thank you, that's very kind. Yeah.
And you find people. I think so much of it is about finding the people that you have a connection with and that you have a shared creative kind of language with, and it's always a shortcut then, isn't it? It saves a lot of time when you're not having to kind of assess someone for the first time and work out how do they work and how there's that. Yeah, it's lovely, I think.
Yeah, there's definitely like a creative groove, isn't there, that you do sort of click with people, and I think we just love working with you and we've done so many projects with you, and it's each of them has been very, very different and come with their very different challenges, but I think we've worked together long enough now where actually we do have that shortcut language, and when we can when we're gonna do this project, Hefin, and it's gonna be like this and this, and you're like, okay, never done anything like that before, but yeah, I'm gonna do it.
Yeah.
And that kind of like openness to like, actually there's so much possibility with kind of creating and crafting worlds, and I think you're an amazing person to be really open to just trying some stuff out and seeing if it works, and I guess we can link that now back to your teachers in school, Dr. Jones, and I've forgotten the other person's name.
Mrs. Davis.
Mrs. Davis.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, it would have been an Evans or a Jenkins or a Davis, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I think that what I love working with Yellow Brick, I think, is really exciting because we're always going on that journey of exploration together, And often, like with the field, for example, like we start off not really knowing what we're doing. We have an idea of what we want to explore, and it feels like a mad experiment at the top. But we kind of just go with it, and I feel really supported in doing that, you know. And we have fun doing it. I think that's the big thing. It doesn't feel like, oh gosh, this is a chore. It's always a pleasure.
Oh, that's very kind.
This seems like it's just an advert for Yellow.
Yeah.
I guess along those lines, in terms of not necessarily saying you have a standard process with regards to your writing, but is there a jumping off point or discovery phase that you kind of have developed over the years, or is it more that you are more adjustable based on the project? Like, how does that, you know, how does a project start for you?
Yeah, I would say generally my projects are quite varied. As you mentioned with the ones we've done with Yellow Break, and I think in general the work I'm doing is, you know, and that's part of my criteria for choosing work is finding I want the next project to be different to the thing I've just done. So as a result, the process is always different. So for example, you know, right now I've got a horror play that is very adult and very dark in development, in kind of rehearsals, but I've also got a really nice, beautiful, kind family show in rehearsals, and they couldn't be further from each other in terms of what they're exploring, and so you kind of have to approach them differently, even though I suppose there are central things that you always stick to. It depends, you know. So when I'm working, for example, on like a family Christmas show, you're working for like a young audience who are usually the hardest audience, I think, from my experience, to particularly kind of keep kind of engaged. And so you have to be, I find I have to be a lot more disciplined with my writing. So quite often the start process of that is quite detailed planning and plotting. Whereas something like a horror thriller, I can be a lot freer with the start, and we can just play with that language and that genre and see what comes from it. So yeah, for me it varies dramatically from, I know some writers have a really set kind of process, but I don't, and I think it's always changing and it's always adapting, and I think it varies on, you know, again, it depends who I'm working with. Like I work with you different to how I'd work with Wales Millennium Centre or Hijinx or whatever. So yeah, it varies.
It's quite a difficult question, isn't it? Because it really depends on the context. And I suppose when it comes to maybe writing dialogue, I'm always really fascinated how writers are able to structure that in a way that feels real, if that's what the piece is. So where do you draw inspiration from writing dialogue? Are you a type of person that's always kind of listening in?
You just write a lot of buses.
I was going to say, on conversations on the bus, you know, are you a bit of a note taker? Do you hear snippets and kind of go, oh gosh, that phrase was amazing? Like how do you kind of collect your inspiration? Do you just hold it all in your head, or are you a notebook do you write notes in a notebook? Like how do you collect your collage of
if you could see the notes on my phone, it's a mess, you know, there's so many things. But yeah, I think I remember years ago hearing I can't remember who it was, a writer talking about how one of their biggest bits of advice for a writer was take the headphones out when you're outside. Like, don't, when you go for a walk or when you walk into work or whatever, don't put the headphones in, don't listen to the podcast, don't listen to just be open to the world. And I love that advice, and I've always stuck with that advice. And you do, as you say, you do come across snippets of dialogue or little bits of a character that you might build on, and that's really nice. But in terms of generally, I mean, I remember again, a bit of advice I remember hearing when it came to writing was that when you're writing dialogue, it's essentially two people doing stuff to each other, and they're not literally saying what they're doing, but essentially what they're doing is doing stuff to each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does.
Again, I don't know if you came across it as an actor, but we often used to play with actioning and actions, and this idea that every line has an action. So for example, I'm talking to you and I'm saying, you look nice today. But actually, the action to that within the scene would be that actually I'm threatening you, or am I flattering you, or am I whatever, you know. So it's that subtext, which is really boring to talk about. But
it's really interesting. It's fascinating.
But so that's, whenever it comes to dialogue, it's always for me, it's that thing of what is someone doing to someone else in the dialogue. Which is maybe not what you think of dialogue, because, you know, there's also an element of, oh, this is nice, this is a nice bouncy dialogue, or this is quite funny, or this is, you know, as well, and making it sound nice. And that's it really. And then in terms of characters, they come from all over the place really. Quite a lot of my characters are like family members or friends. Another thing I do quite a lot is I'll dreamcast something I'm working on. So I'll be writing it and I'll be thinking, oh, okay, well, this is, for example, the late Maggie Smith. Do you know what I mean? I'll be thinking, okay, this is Maggie Smith. So I'm writing it in her voice, and that's a really good way of like focusing the type of character that you're writing. I do that a lot.
I love that.
Yeah, it's great. It's a really good one to do, and you're always disappointed when you can't get Maggie Smith. But do you send like a kind of casting sheet with the script just to say, here's my thinking on the casting. Yeah, what's the budget? Yeah.
And then push it through anyway.
Yeah.
They may say yes.
Yeah. Just try your best.
Yeah. But what's lucky, actually, particularly in the Welsh language, is because the Welsh language world is quite small, I have been lucky enough to write parts for specific actors and then had those actors play it, which is quite rare, probably. But that's been nice. And they've smashed it, obviously.
And you talked about like your some characters being very much influenced by kind of friends and family. How much, because you grew up in Carmarthen, didn't you? How much of Carmarthen has influenced your writing? So I don't know, the landscape or even, you know, the place where you grew up.
Yeah, I think I'm a really proud Carmarthen boy. Like I think growing up I hated Carmarthen because there was nothing in the 90s. There was nothing there. You know, since then we've had a cinema, you know, and a bowling alley and all of that, which is
amenities,
incredibly exotic, you know.
Well, my mum went there the other day and she said, "Well, I tell you what, Alison, it's better than Swansea."
Oh no,
that's what she said.
Oh well, yeah. Do you know what amazes me? They get a lot of coach trips in Carmarthen.
Oh yeah, mum was part of said coach trip. She's been there a few times now over the last couple of years. She loves it.
Good.
She loves Carmarthen.
Great. Come and live here.
Yeah.
And I suppose Carmarthen is I suppose considered within what they call like a Welsh language heartland. So I think that plays a lot. Like you'd walk down the street in Carmarthen and you hear Welsh all the time, and that's nice. So that bilingualism seeps into my work all the time, and I grew up with, you know, a Welsh-speaking mum and a dad who then learnt Welsh, so there is that bilingualism. So one side of the family is Welsh-speaking, one's not. So I think the bilingualism is always interesting and has always been there. And that sense of, I suppose, sense of ruralness, which again comes into the field to an extent, is you know, the beauty of somewhere like Carmarthenshire. And I sound like their tourism board now, don't I? But you're 20 minutes from the sea, you're 20 minutes from the mountains, you're 20 minutes from a beautiful valley, you've got whatever, you know, there's castles, there's whatever. And so you're always surrounded by pretty much everything that Wales has to offer geographically is in Carmarthenshire. And that's lovely. And I think, that landscape and the greenery and the ruralness of it. All again seeps into my work all the time. As I say, I've been working on a play called Pontypool at the moment, and that again is set in a small town. And so it's been really easy to tap into that sense of what it's like to grow up in a small town and live in a small town and what that community is like. And because I think one of the things that sums up Welshness to me more than anything is our sense of humour. Like I don't think we take ourselves too seriously as a nation, you know. Now, obviously, if you're not Welsh and you make a joke about us, we won't be happy. But we're quite happy to laugh at ourselves, and I that's always been at the heart of Welshness to me whenever I represent it, in whatever way. Yeah. What would you say is Welshness?
Oh, that's a really good question. I guess there's always for me like a warmth to it, and I don't know if that's in the musicality of the Welsh language in itself. I mean, I'm not a Welsh speaker, but I do adore listening to people speaking Welsh, and I do adore listening to fiction or stories in Welsh. There's a musicality to it that I don't think like the English language itself has necessarily. So I think that warmth in the actual spoken word, and then I suppose then within the people, you know, I think there's, you know, maybe this is kind of rose-tinted glasses, but, you know, they're kind of, and maybe because it's home, you know, but there is a kind of warmth to Wales as a place, and particularly within the landscapes of Wales as well, you know, the sea and the mountains and the forests. I don't know, and I know that, you know, that's a generic thing across the globe. You can find seas, forests, you know, elsewhere in the mountains, but I don't know, there's a warmth here, and yeah, maybe that's tied to, I guess, this feeling of home, or I guess heraeth, isn't it? So yeah, I think warmth for me is the first word that came up. Definitely.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's always that word cwtch, isn't it?
Yeah,
it
is
is.
cwtch.
It's like feeling like you're home.
Yeah.
And I suppose, as you say, that's a feeling that anyone gets from, or if you're fortunate enough to have a good relationship with your home.
Yeah.
Julian's looking very pensive. He's like,
I think what you were talking about earlier with living in Carmarthen is kind of almost maybe apart from some parts of mid Wales, but generally speaking, connectedness to a lot of environments is pretty much prevalent through all of Wales, right? So I can go, as you said, even in city centre of Cardiff, I can be at Ogmore in 30 minutes, I can be in the Brecon Beacons in 40 minutes, and I can be in Woodland in between in 20 minutes. And I can then also be in a city, a very small city, but a city, and then also in a town. So I wonder if that almost then manifests itself in the people. And so it is connected, it is slightly friendlier because it's still, you know, that whole joke that everything is referenced by the size of Wales, you know, like there's a little map of Wales and it's 10 times the size of Wales or whatever. But I think that kind of works quite well because it kind of highlights the fact that there is that connectedness. So maybe that. I think the humour thing is correct, and I think it gets misinterpreted a lot. Like you say, like you can't then joke backwards. That definitely is not the case. That is not a thing. I can be self-deprecating through humour. You can't come back the other way.
Yeah,
that's a no-no.
Do you know what? I was in Covent Garden recently, and do you know they've got these like street performers, and there was a guy doing like a bit of a skit, like a little bit of he was a juggler or something, but he was doing a bit of a skit, and he was going through all the nationalities, doing like a little gag about everyone, and he got to Welsh, and he just did a sheep noise. Do you know? And everybody laughed, but I was fuming. I was absolutely fuming. Do you know what I mean? And yeah, again, that thing of I generally think, I'm quite willing to laugh at myself, but when somebody else makes the joke, I'm not happy. Yeah, do you know?
Yeah.
Watch out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So you'd mentioned Pontypool a minute ago, which I'm very, very excited about hearing more about. So tell us a little bit about the project. So I had a little look on the internet before this conversation. So it's based on the original radio play by Tony Burgess, which inspired the 2008 cult horror film Pontypool, which you have now adapted for the stage. Tell us a little bit more about this project, because it involves zombies, doesn't it?
It does, but we're not allowed to use the Z word.
Oh, you're not?
No, we're not. The original, not that we're not allowed to, but the original creators, the writer and the director of the film are quite adamant that they're not zombies. They're something else. It started off as a novel, which was then adapted into a radio play, which then adapted into a film. So it's had multiple kind of versions, and now we're adapting it into a stage adaptation. The interesting thing about it is that it's originally set in Canada, in a town called Pontypool in Ontario, Canada. And we've obviously relocated it to Pontypool in Wales. And what's really interesting is that none of us had any idea that there was a Pontypool in Canada, and the original creators had no idea there was a Pontypool in Wales.
Really?
Yeah.
It seems so wrong the other way, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
It definitely was based on Pontypool from Wales.
The Canadian one is obviously named after the Welsh one, but it's interesting that they have no awareness of that Welsh connection, even though the writer, interestingly, has a Welsh connection in the family. And it still hadn't made that connection. So it's fascinating, actually. And we've adapted it for the stage. And it's like a horror, thriller. There's some ridiculous dark humour in there as well. But it's essentially, it's a really interesting film and radio play in the sense that it's set in one location. So it's in this basement radio station, local radio station in Pontypool, in this small town in the Welsh Valleys. And we start off as any other day. We go into the breakfast show, they're doing a live radio show, and then we start to realise that something's not quite right in the town that morning, based on reports that are coming in and phone calls that are coming in. The original is very much based on, or influenced in some way by, do you know the really famous Orson Welles' War of the Worlds? Radio broadcast, which apparently caused a bit of a panic at the time of release. It's kind of inspired by that to an extent, and you can really feel that in the way that so much of the storytelling is told through what we're hearing, not what we're seeing. And it slowly becomes more and more and more crazy until it's full on horror. So it's been a really fun one to do because it's so heavily in one genre, and it's not a genre that you see loads in theatre. We tend to see like ghost stories quite a bit, but the full on like zombie genre is not something you see a lot in that medium.
Yeah, and I guess why do you think that is? Is that because I suppose it's such a difficult one to portray, isn't it? Film enables you to do so much more with, I guess, the visual aspect of it, whereas I suppose if you want to kind of crowd the stage with 100 actors all dressed like zombies,
you can imagine a zombie chase in a small theatre. Oh look, I've been caught, because it's literally across the stage. It's like, you imagine the 4-hour running and chasing, and it's like, oh no, it's there, he's caught me straight away.
There's the horde of one actors that they could afford. It's like,
he's doing his best.
Oh look, it's the same actor but a different costume now. Right.
I think he's lost a limb this time.
I think that is a big thing. I think horror, I think the best horror is often low budget, and it is quite small scale. But we tend to think of horror as being big visual stuff. I think also there is a snobbery around horror and genre in general, sci-fi, and I think that is maybe a reason we don't see it as much in theatre, because we have this idea that theatre is a little bit more highbrow, whereas again, good horror is highbrow. Good horror absolutely engages with the world we live in and some really relevant subject matter, which is what Pontypool does. So yeah, I think as much as I disagree with it, I think there is a snobbery around genre in general in theatre, and I'm really excited to be trying to break that, you know.
So how long has this project been in the works? So we've talked about kind of opening doors and all of that. So it'd be really interesting to understand, how did you get to this point of basically being able to create a stage adaptation of, you know, some quite big IP in relation to, you know, the story that you're working with and the iterations that have come before.
Yeah, so I wrote the first draft of Pontypool in 2019. So that kind of gives you a sense of how long things take to develop. Obviously, there was like a world-changing event in the middle of that, which we don't need to talk about. But yeah, started off, we talked earlier about kind of working with people that you've worked before, and it was a case of there was a director who was looking for a collaborator for a project, and they were asking around, and Dan Jones at the other room, who I'd done some work with, happened to just recommend me. And so the director, another Dan, got in touch with me and was like, are you interested in this? It's horror, it's playing with kind of some really interesting themes that you seem to be interested in. And like, you know, I said, yeah, this sounds great. Let's have a go. And so, yeah, so we started from there really. And that was in I think he got the rights in 2018, and then I wrote the first draft in 2019, and then we've been fortunate enough that Wales Millennium Centre have really invested in it, so they've given us time to workshop, so I've been able to write a draft, we workshop it, write another draft, we have a little bit of a longer workshop, and that's been the process really up until now, and now we're in rehearsals, and about to put it on stage, ready for Halloween, which is really cool. Yeah. Great timing, and not a fluke at all.
Yeah, totally planned within the strategy of the rollout of the piece.
In 2018, in 6 years' time, we will be on stage for Halloween.
Yeah, yep, that's the plan.
How, in terms of the rights of the IP, I don't know if this is a fundamental change, but the change of location from Pontypool in Canada to Pontypool in Wales, is that something that is negotiated, you know, within that, or is that more of a, now you've got the IP, you can kind of interpret it to a level and you go back to those people, or is, you know, like, is that a thing at all?
So we've been really fortunate that Tony Burgess, the original writer, has been really open with conversation, and I think he was, as soon as we mentioned the Welsh link, and as soon as I think he realised that he had Welsh family link, I think that felt really exciting to him. There's an element of bilingualism in Pontypool, because obviously Canada is a bilingual country, and so that idea of bringing it to Wales meant it translated almost perfectly in that sense. And so there was some really interesting and exciting potential things to explore by moving it. And so he was really open to it. So we were really lucky in that sense. In terms of like the right stuff, I don't know how that works because, you know, that's been left to like legal teams and stuff. But yeah, we've been really lucky that Tony's been had that really open conversation with us all the whole time in regards to what we can do, and he'd been pretty free to let us kind of fly with it really, which is brilliant.
It seems like it, like you say, it is almost a perfect storm with English and French in Canada and English and Welsh here, and also like you say, there being those two places, it is that perfect storm of two bilingual nations struggling with a minority language to some degree, or more regional, I guess, with Canada. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah,
like, we should always look towards Canada, and Canada looks towards Wales for shared IP.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I don't know why, I've always weirdly felt really kind of linked to Canada and really linked to New Zealand. And I think it's because they're two nations that are like Wales. They're stuck next to a massive power. And so they're often kind of in the shadow of that bigger nation. I don't know why, but it's, yeah, I think that is interesting. And as you say, that the minority language thing and the weight and the political kind of baggage that comes with that is really interesting again, because it translates quite easily. Whereas you translate it to England, that's much harder to do, because there isn't that kind of existing kind of stuff that exists around language. Yeah.
In terms of then the actual staging of the piece, you kind of mentioned that we don't often see horror as a genre very much within theatre. How have you kind of got around any sort of the logistical elements of, I suppose, the narrative of, it's a sort of zombie apocalypse-esque? So yeah, how has that been kind of portrayed?
As I mentioned before, so much of the action is heard, not seen, and I think that helps a lot. So the horror is not so much in what we're seeing, but what we're hearing and what is implied. So a lot of the violence is heard, a lot of this violence is described, and so it's, as a writer, that's really fun, because you're getting that sense of the horror across through the way people are describing the things. Having said that, we're absolutely playing into the horror because it's horror. So we've got a fantastic SFX guy who's doing prosthetics for us, and they've been yesterday I was in the rehearsal room and they were playing with blood, and they were talking about how many gallons of blood we need to order and all of this stuff, which is really exciting. And there's certain set pieces that you can play with on a stage where you don't need a lot of kind of a massive cast or whatever. You can play with sound, you can play with darkness. I think on stage as well, so much horror is about tension and eking out that tension and building that sense of dread and that sense of, oh my goodness, something's going to happen, something horrible is going to happen. And that it's like the classic thing of if someone had a cushion, you'd want them to be slowly bringing the cushion up towards their head, because you know that something horrible is going to happen. And I think that's the difference between maybe film and theatre, is that you have to move away from the visuals and play much more with atmosphere and with tension, and then have fun with breaking that tension. And how do we find ways of scaring an audience and chilling an audience and leaving the audience with this kind of sense of, I guess, unease, maybe, and hopefully letting them go away with all of that stuff kind of running around in their head, and it's one of those ones where hopefully people will be still thinking about it the next day.
I guess the zombie genre it comes with so much. It comes with a playbook in itself, doesn't it? In terms of this. Are they fast zombies? Are they slow zombies? It's the kind of Shaun of the Dead kind of tropes that are weaved within that kind of comedy of it. But I guess how much does it play with leaning into the genre, or how much does it sort of subvert anything, or any people's expectations of what that genre, usually contains?
I think what excited me about this project, and it was the thing that sold me this project, was it's a completely new take on the zombie genre. It's not any form of zombie that you've seen in any other film. It plays with the same kind of lore, but the way it plays with it is so clever, and it taps into the way it taps into bilingualism, the way it taps into politics, the way it taps into kind of modern discourse, and the way we kind of discuss political kind of issues in the media, it all kind of plays into the zombie stuff in a way that maybe we haven't seen before. You know, it's not the undead. It's not, you know, a virus caught in a lab somewhere. It's something completely different. And I don't want to say it because it's a spoiler.
Don't say it. Don't
but
say it.
Anyone who knows the source material will know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And it's a really clever twist on the zombie genre. If we use the word zombie, yeah.
Yeah, it's fine.
If it's, yeah.
So to kind of like begin wrapping up our little conversation, what is the most recent thing that maybe you've seen or watched or listened to that has kind of really inspired you?
Oh, that's a good question, isn't it?
I know.
That's a really good question. Do you know what? I've just finished watching Chaos on Netflix. Have you watched Chaos?
Oh, no.
No, we've not.
Chaos with a K.
Chaos with a K. No, I've not seen it.
I bloody loved that. So they're taking Greek mythology. So they're taking the story like the gods and Orpheus and Eurydice and their kind of journey into the underworld, but they're bringing it like smack bang into modern day, and it's very much set in like a modern day Greece. It has Jeff Goldblum as Zeus. I mean, that sells it. And yeah, just the way it explores mythology, but from a really modern point of view, is just so clever and so exciting. Apparently, they've cancelled it after one series, which is classic Netflix, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that really excited me as a piece of TV, you know. What has anything captured your imagination recently?
I've been watching Sneaky Pete on Amazon.
I guess it would be Amazon, yeah.
I think it's a fairly old, you know, it's not a recent series. And it's kind of like a mix of, how would you describe it?
I mean, it's grifters and con men, isn't it, really?
Mm.
As it's gone on, I think I'm on season 2 now. As it's gone on, it's become so intricate. Just when you think there couldn't be more twists, there are more twists.
Oh, nice.
So I don't know what the writer's storyboard looked like, just to kind of be able to keep track of all of these threads and connections. I'm kind of just in awe of it for just that web of kind of literal deceit.
There are definitely a few TV shows out there, aren't there, where you just can't comprehend quite how intricate the lacing of, you know, the character coming back into it, or, you know, the action coming back into it, and the consequence, or I think maybe when we saw Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., some of those end of season episodes where you're like, there is no way anyone can survive this. There's no way it's getting worse or anything like that. And it got worse, and they survived it. And there was it's a bit like that, isn't it? There's this form of, and I don't know if we've had this conversation previously, where there's this form of writing where it's almost like they get to the end where they think it is, and then they go worse again. You know, they twist it again, and you're like, it's almost like they're one-upping themselves within the writer's room. Okay, guys, this is gonna really pickle everyone's head. Like how, and then you go, oh my god, that's how they got out of it. Like there's a side story, isn't there, where where the granddad hires someone, a hitman, to kill him, and then about 3 episodes or 2 episodes later, it just transpires that hitman effectively becomes cannon fodder for another thing happening in the side of the episode.
Okay, yeah.
And without that hitman, the granddad dies and this robbery takes place. But with that hitman, everything changes. You know, and those small little bits that are peppered in, and suddenly it's like, oof, the consequence of that ripple. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, I am enjoying it. It's it's just because it's just so intricate, and I'm like, wow. It's hopefully they, I'm only on season 2. I don't know how many seasons there are. Hopefully they don't go too far and then spoil it, which potentially might happen. But yeah, that's what I've been watching on the old Telema box.
Sneaky Pete.
Sneaky Pete.
Oh, that's
It's
going on
the
the list.
actor who played, was it Phoebe's brother in Friends?
Oh, wow.
It's him, I think. I can't remember.
And it's
his
Bryan Cranston is the producer and creator, I think.
Yeah, and he was acting in the season 1 as well. So yeah, it's really check it out.
I will check that out.
And if you like animation, do try and find Scavenger's Reign. It's very good.
Okay.
It's like a sci-fi. People dropped off into this world that is, I would say, the most thought out world I've ever seen. Like in terms of what the life and the environment is like. And there's a group of people all scattered around the planet that are effectively trying to get to one ship. Very good. Very bizarre. It's kind of like every animal and every being within the world kind of is almost used as a tool. Oh. So like they work out that they can kind of do something to one of these plants and then it'll float. And then that means they'll be able to get up to the top of a hill, or there'll be one that will allow them to kind of like, I think it's like protect them from acid rain and things like that. But really fantastic anime kind of piece of work. That's my most recent one. Mine have all been sci-fi recently, I think. Yeah. Do love a bit of sci-fi.
I do love a bit of sci-fi. And then final question to wrap up our quick chat. What upcoming projects are you excited about, and how do you see your work continuing to evolve over the next few years? Really,
just an easy question.
Oh well, do you know what? I'm at a point at the moment where I'm working on some like personal projects for the first time in about 4 years. I've actually got time to work on stuff that I want to work on. Not that I don't want to work on, other people's projects as well. But so I've got a couple of projects that I'm working on there, and one of them is a really exciting, like it's kind of horror genre, but it's horror meets the second homes crisis in rural Wales, which is just everything I want to talk about, write about right now, which is that is really exciting me. And yeah, I've got a couple of, I've got another like one-hander monologue play about a Nepo baby serial killer, which I'm having fun writing.
That's great.
Yeah, it's about having fun, isn't it? They call it they call plays, so you have to play, do you know? And so that's what I'm doing. And I think in terms of where I go from here, it's exactly that. It's just keep playing, keep being open and seeing what comes, like you guys really, it's I think it's boring if you stick in one place. There's that really famous David Bowie quote, isn't there, about going like further into the water than what's comfortable so that your feet are just touching the kind of the floor. And I think that's how I've always looked at my kind of career and my work is, if you're comfortable, like you're in the wrong place, and so just keep on playing, keep on exploring and being open to what's next, really.
That's just a great end to this fantastic discussion. Thank you so much for coming in and spending some time talking about your work, and thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Crafted Reality. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe and share it with your friends. And of course, if you want to support the podcast and access exclusive content, head over to our Patreon page. We'll be back next month. We'll see you then.